Today we celebrate the story of Dagmar Twyman, née Mastalerski, born 24th of July 1949 in Kaltenkirchen, Germany, to parents Josef and Edith Mastalerski. Dagmar has a sister, Marliese, two brothers, Norman and Frank. Dagmar grew up in Imbil, Queensland, and now lives in Bargara, Queensland. Dagmar has two sons, two granddaughters, and a grandson. And this is Dagmar's story.
My earliest memories of growing up in Australia, having been born in Germany, were a very, very simple life. Like many people in Australia at the time, money was always scarce, but I had very how could I say, about my parents, they sort of were very, here we go. They were very good at creating things. My father grew all our vegetables. We always had chooks in the backyard, which was quite common in those days, and my mother was a wonderful seamstress who did a lot of clothes for us. We lived in a place called Stirling's Crossing, which was about 5 miles outside of Imbil. It was a place where a lot of migrants were living because you had to put 2 years back into the country as coming out as migrants. And we lived in very simple homes, like there were 2 bedrooms and a central lounge living area. Electricity, I think, until I left home, we never had electricity. So missed out on television and things like that, but the radio was a very good nighttime thing. It didn't bother us because we lived such a free childhood. We, like all children, like many children those days, you left home in the morning and you were told to get home before dark, and you left not with a bottle of water like today, but you would drink out of the creeks even, and your parents never knew where they were, and we had the whole forestry at our disposal. Summer times you learned to swim very easily very early. Because in summer times, if you couldn't swim, well, you had nobody to play with because there was a creek not far away, and that's where we spent most of our summer times. We played many games where we just disappeared into the forest and came back. Dad grew all our own fresh fruit and vegetables. We had chooks, which was a special occasion. I had a sister and 2 brothers, and one chook at Christmas time or whenever would feed us very heartily. Mum was a wonderful cook in pastries and everything like that, so we always ate very well. We had farmers down the road where we got our milk, and we really wanted for nothing. It was a simple life, but a happy childhood. Christmas was celebrated on Christmas Eve, and Dad would disappear for a while and come back dressed as a swag, and we would have to sing a song or tell a story, and he would stay and eat and have beautiful food with us, and he would disappear. And every time he'd come back after that and sort of curse because he'd missed Santa Claus again. Mum did amazing food in our wooden stove, Pfefferkuchen. I think in my whole life I only had 2 Christmases without Pfefferkuchen, which is a traditional gingerbread biscuits. The ingredients used to be sent over from Germany. Our Christmas tree, Mum would search the forestry for days just to find the right Christmas tree, and there were thousands to pick from, but it had to be right. The decorations we got sent over from Germany, and they were like the ones, I still have ones that I use on my tree today. School for us was in Imbil, which was 5 miles away, and we had a very, very old school bus. At the time, the roads were not sealed, and there were lots of floods before Barumba Dam was built, so it was not uncommon to have to go through the forestry to get to school, and the roads were very clayey, and the bus often slipped down the hill. So I had made a deal with the bus driver that I would walk the hills and I'd meet him at the top. In grade 1, English wasn't my first language, so I had limited English. My sister had gone the year before me, so we learnt a little bit. In our class there were children from all countries, like all European countries, and it was a very big melting pot. We had an elderly teacher, and everything was done by rote those days, and by the end of the year I think we were basically on the same page as the English students. Studying was not something I did dearly, unlike my sister, but even without my study, I did quite well at school and I enjoyed my school days. You came away with the knowledge to work as a secretary with shorthand typing, bookkeeping to trial balance standard, and for those times that was a very good qualification to have. After leaving school, I moved to Brisbane and lived with my sister and a few other children because Mum and Dad were still living in Imbil and there was no work in that area. And I worked for the government for 3 years. During that time, even as a young girl, I always knew I wanted to travel and go back to my home country, what I still considered my home country at the time, and meet my grandparents and the rest of my family. So after working for 3.5 years, there was a special flight by Qantas and I was on it. And I went first to Germany, where I spent 3 months with my family over there, met all my cousins and my nieces and my grandparents and great-grandparents. After that, to earn some money, I was working at an American Air Force base in Germany for 3 months, then ended up in Naples, working in a bar in Naples, and for about 6 weeks. And we enjoyed every Sunday going along the Amalfi Coast and trying out the different restaurants and everything. This was in 1970, where Europe was still, where the tourism isn't as it is today, so it was still very, very unspoiled. From there we ended up taking a train to Spain, where I lived and worked for 9 months, and in that time got to love everything Spanish, worked in a bar but got to do a lot of travel to Morocco and back to Italy and Portugal and that, and made many friends that I still have today. After that, there was times we went up through France and went up to Holland and did some work in London and Scotland and Wales as well. So coming back to Australia, I found it very, very hard to settle. I stayed at the Sunshine Coast for a little bit and then went down to visit a friend in Tasmania, which ended up with a job in Sydney doing temporary office work, which I enjoyed and got to know some of the Australian cities and the wonderful things we had to offer. I was still very restless at this stage, but met 2 German girls and we decided to hitchhike to Cairns, and we wanted to be in Darwin for that Christmas. But on upon arriving in Cairns, I worked on Green Island for a while and just stayed there because they travelled on and ended up going back to Sydney and didn't make it. So in Cairns, it was a very simple life. Cairns was very small with 1 set of traffic lights and had a variety of jobs because it was like all small towns at that time. Because you weren't born there or your parents weren't born there, it was very hard to fit a job into what they call the norm. So most of our work was bar work and restaurant work. And I was very lucky for 3 months of the year to actually work in the marlin season, where you go out to the reef and your charters would leave for you, and it was a very, very enjoyable time, a very, very good time. During my time in Cairns, I met wonderful people with who I'm still friends with today, some who live up there, some who are scattered throughout Australia, but we do try to catch up every couple of years, if not so regular. From there, once the charter business was finished, I met my husband. We were having drinks in a bar one day and he knew one of the girls I was with, and well, for me it was probably love at first sight, but anyhow, he might differ on that one. So Peter at the time was working up in the Gulf of Carpentaria as a deckhand, as a skipper. He was a cadet for Markwells, and I'd had applied for a job with a shipping company in Cairns, but the day I found out that I had the job with the shipping company, I had a telegram from him saying he'd got his first drive and did I want to go up there and work with him. So, of course, I took that option. The years fishing in the Gulf, I was really only there for 2 years, but fishing in the Gulf was a really amazing experience. The trawlers weren't as big as they are today, and we saw every sunrise and every sunset, and really it was a carefree life, which I enjoyed greatly. After that, for a couple of years, we bought our own trawler, a small boat that we fetched from the east coast, from Marillion Harbour in Innisfail, and that was a very enjoyable time as well. One of my most amazing experience when I was working in Cairns was a trip that we did with 3 other people. I certainly wasn't the skipper. We did a trip from Cairns to Thursday Island, and the purpose of it was, at that stage, is the Japanese had let off quite a few thousand, I think it was about 2,000 Japanese glass floats, and the purpose of that was to track the ocean currents. And in some of these, they'd had vouchers for a citizen watch with a story from a Japanese student, or just a story and a watch from a Japanese student. So on the way up to Thursday Island, we stopped at every island, basically almost every island between Cairns and Thursday Island. We arrived in Thursday Island at New Year's Eve and danced with the natives and had a wonderful time. And on the way back, we beachcombed almost every inch of the Australian coastline collecting these Japanese glass floats. We ended up collecting about 300 of them, and inside these that we saw, we ended up with 5 of the watches. The story of that trip I've actually written down in words, and it's one of my things to do that I need to print out and get my act together to do that. With our relationship working on the boat, at first just the 2 of us worked the trawler, and it really sort of cemented the fact that yes, we could probably live with each other. So in 1979 we got married in Cairns in a friend's garden, and it was not long, it was the next year after that, we found out we were having our first child, and my first son Blake was born on the 19th of August 1980. Our second son Jason was born on the 18th of January 1983. At this time Peter was still in the fishing industry, and but managed to get back and spend a lot of the early months with him. After that, Peter continued fishing and he went up to Darwin. He was away for long periods of time because I was then grounded with the children, so Peter was fishing by himself. But we found that worked fairly well because when he was home 24/7, and he spent a lot of time with the children, and it was sometimes the other children became envious of his time. Bundaberg was very good to the Twyman family. We bought a house in town in Avoca, and the children found good schools, and we made lots of friends through their sports. The boys played soccer to start with, and then it was basketball. They also joined the life-saving club. So that life was a very, very good for us, and we still have those friends today. The boys completed senior here, and of course they were ready to spread their wings and leave town. Before the children left school, and my husband completed his 4 years of study and graduated at the university, but there were changes afoot at the TAFE College, and he felt that what he was teaching was not being taken up by his students. So through a friend, he started working overseas, and he used to work a month on and a month off in different countries, first in Nigeria, then in Venezuela, and ended up in a place called Kazakhstan, where he was on the first exploration rig in the Caspian Sea. From there, he started a training college with other Australian partners, and our life was very different then because he would work 5 weeks on, 5 weeks off, and then at Christmas time he would have a break. The life suited us. It was hard, but the boys adjusted to it really well. When he was home, he was a stay-at-home father, and it was something that we all got very used to, and it did suit our lifestyle. One of the benefits of Peter working overseas is that it afforded us travel, because he would garnish lots of frequent flyer points. So before the children left home to go to university or whatever they were going to do or further their careers, we decided we would take them to Europe and get them to meet my German family. My grandparents at that stage were already deceased, but they met my uncles and aunts and cousins and nieces and nephews. So, and got to experience a white Christmas, and they really turned it on for that because we did have snow and it was a wonderful time. While we were there, we travelled down to Austria and had 2 weeks in a ski resort. We had a couple of nights in Paris and then had about 8 days in Italy, staying in Rome, but heading down to Pompeii and Naples, and we did the Amalfi Coast. So, and that was a really enjoyable time. And we were glad we could do it with them and they could experience it with us, and it was a fabulous family holiday. I managed to go over quite a few other times. We, after a miracle in 2004, I reconnected with my Polish family. So we also, in 2006, I met Peter overseas and we went to Poland, and from there we did an amazing train trip to Venice, through a lot of Balkan countries down to Istanbul. And from there I managed to get into Kazakhstan and see the work that Peter was doing over there at their training centre that they'd established. It wasn't the last trip I did, but it used to save him coming home because it used to take him about 3 days to get home from where he worked, and it was quite exhausting. It took him quite a time to recuperate and get ready for the next journey over there. One of my also most memorable trips was going back to Poland and meeting my family. When the internet became accessible to everybody, through the internet I reconnected with my father's sister's grandson. His grandmother had just died 2 years previously, and she made him promise to never stop looking for the Australian side of the family. And so what we did one year was I flew into Warsaw, met my husband there, and we spent many, many weeks getting to know our Polish family. I felt really at home there, and we went to the house where my father was born and travelled also to where he was a prisoner of war. So I felt very comfortable, and I felt that they weren't strangers. They felt like family to me, and that's another very big highlight of my life. Once the children had left home and flown the coop, we sort of looked, well, what do we do now? We didn't really want to stay in town, and I remember once my husband said to me, he said, "Oh, I don't want to stay here." He said, "I think we should go somewhere else." And jokingly I said to him for him to choose, and I would let him know whether I would go with him. But I'd started working down at Bargara, which is on the coast from Bundaberg, and he picked me up one day and he said, "I think we should move here." And we looked at one house which we both loved, and I'd say since then, which is now I think 17 years, we've been at Bargara after 17 years in Bundaberg. Peter and I were very fortunate. I don't know how it happened, but we raised two very upstanding boys. This is where I get teary, but I'm okay. They have both married Bundaberg girls. They both did a bit of travelling and worked overseas. They both moved away and decided to do trades. Blake became an air conditioner and refrigeration mechanic, and Jason went down and did marine electrical. They've both done various aspects of everything. Blake did some teaching at a college. He then went on to do electrical side, but on the industrial side. Jason worked in Canada and La Paz, Mexico as a marine electrician, but settled back in Bundaberg where he met Laura. They both married. Laura and Jason got married locally. Blake and Janelle had a beautiful wedding up at Pepper's Tamarind Resort. Blake and Janelle have settled in Brisbane, and they have given me two beautiful daughters, granddaughters, should I say. Pippa, who is now 9.5, and Eden, who is now 6, she will tell you she's going on 7. Jason and Laura were a bit of late starters with the children. They've given me a beautiful grandson, Theo, who I get to spend a lot of time with, and I've been assured that there is more family on the way. My husband Peter retired from his working in Kazakhstan in 2014 and found it a little bit hard to adjust, but his love of music came back, and so he started playing his drums again, and of course my yoga room turned into a drum room. At a function one day we met our solicitor, who'd also just retired, and they decided they would do some jam sessions in our house. Our little jam sessions turned out to be street parties where we would have a collection of musicians, and I remember one wonderful day with lots of visitors setting up their chairs in the front yard, and we were having, I think there was something like 12 musicians playing in our garage, from saxophones to all sorts of instruments, anything you could name. They were fabulous times and really gave him an interest that suited really well. And to see the visitors who would come and dance to their music was very, very, very many happy times. But unfortunately, 2 years after retirement in 2016, Peter passed away from just a sudden death. I found him at home, and that was a very, very hard time for all of us. For this, the boys were wonderful and they really carried me through, and their wives as well. So I consider myself very happy and very fortunate to have the family that I do. I have one sister and two brothers. My sister and I, as I said before, we were born in Germany and my brothers were born in Australia. And my sister lives down the Gold Coast and my brothers live in Brisbane. We had an amazing mother who we lost at the age of 93. Found that quite difficult because Peter had always passed away and she was my sounding board and I think I was hers, and we used to telephone regularly. She had an amazing life, a hard life. The very early years of her life were very hard. And I just found that whatever happened and however bad it got, she never ever gave up. She always made the most of every day. She was lucky to enjoy good health. But through watching her, and this is where it gets sad, but watching her and her struggles did make me know that to make the most of every day and know that always be grateful for what we have and know that we have got a very good life in Australia. It's something she made for us and we've enjoyed. My dad was in Poland. He was a teacher, and when he came out here, because you had to give 2 years back to Australia in wherever they sent you, and because by that time there were 4 of us children, we could not even consider the notion that he would go to university and become a teacher in Australia. He was a very knowledgeable person, and our teachers were often spending nights at our place just picking his brain for European history and what they learned for him. So they were wonderful times. He unfortunately died at a very young age of 55 from liver cancer, and it was very sad that he never got to see my children, because he was one where we had a family backyard where the children were always playing with him, and he would build toys and gymnastic stuff in the backyard. So our neighbourhood was the neighbourhood play centre. My father was a quiet man. I resembled him greatly. I was the one unlucky person in the family to inherit his nose, but anyhow, I've learned to live with that. During the war, he was captured. Being Polish, he was captured very early in the peace and spent the war in a German prisoner of war camp. Where he was not, because he was an officer, they were quite well treated and they got their Red Cross parcels. And when he was liberated, he ended up working as an interpreter for the British in Hamburg for the resettlement program, and it was while living here and being billeted on the farms in Germany that he met my mother. He lived a quiet life. He enjoyed his life in the forestry. He was always a keen gardener, and he enjoyed the simple life. I think he felt that the family was safe here and he would not have to relive what he went through in those years. Unfortunately, when he died in 1969, after battling liver cancer for 3 years, I was 19 years old, and my one regret in life is that I did not get to know him as a person and did not learn about his background and that, because he was a father, and as a teenager your life gets busy and you're looking after yourself. My one regret is with that we didn't have contacts with his family back in Poland, which didn't happen till many years later. It did not happen until 2004, which were a lot of wasted years that we could have learnt to know them. As we're making this, I am now 73 years old, enjoying living in a lovely neighbourhood in Bargara in Jessie Court with beautiful neighbours. I'm within walking distance to the beach, and on an energetic day I can walk to the village. I live a simple life. I enjoy reading. Done a few puzzles with COVID and everything like that. But I have lovely friends. I do some volunteer work. I go to a book club and get to go down to Brisbane and see my family quite a bit.
We hope you enjoyed the sharing of this story today. If you'd like information on how you can celebrate your story, follow the links below.